what right do I have as a relatively privileged Canadian to be in this space? And what do I have to contribute? What I have found is that over the past years, that my place is really as one of facilitating, of helping bridge connections between funders, partners, and others, and bringing people together. And so I'm really excited about the increased localization conversations that are happening. And I think that that is key. And it helps me understand and feel that yes, with these discussions that there is a place for all of us in this space. And so over the past 6 years, I was privileged to manage a conservation agriculture program in East Africa that worked together with 11 local partners in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania. And through this, I really learned a lot about the power of localization, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of that today. That said, I would probably feel a lot more comfortable if it wasn't me speaking here, but one of our partners telling their story, but I'm happy to present for them today. So thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. And we're very happy to have you here with your vast development experience. And we're really excited also to hear about localization and how it informs your work. So we're now going to move into the main part of the discussion, where I will invite each speaker to reflect for about 10 minutes on their work within food systems and address how localization has been used or how it relates, a facet of localization. So as mentioned earlier, I encourage you to use the Q&A function found at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of the panelists. We have a very dynamic group, each speaking from a different perspective in a different, with different experiences. So I'd like to first invite Geneviève to speak from the Food Security Policy Working Group's perspective. So Geneviève, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Elisabeth.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So the Learning Ability on the localization had a panel where there were 4 presenters from organizations. First was Mr. Patrick Corboui, who is the General Director of the Institute Margaret A. Gillum for World Food Security in Montreal. And Corboui, he took the microphone, and we saw that through the food system, we needed to work on durability. Maria Theresa Nogales, who is the General Director of the Foundation Alternativas, who showed the impact of colonization on food security through agricultural farms, how this colonization led to a loss of sovereignty of the seeds. The third person was Sangai, who worked with the coordinators of NGO in Senegal, and his presentation was focused on the future by presenting us challenges which the food system found themselves in front of 9 billion people from here to 2000, and that's difficult for our country, and it's to make a sustainable situation. And the last but not least is Dom Morrison, who was the founder and curator of the work group Autochtone. It's the working group on Indigenous food sovereignty, which is based in British Columbia, and experience of Indigenous people and key observations and findings that were adopted not only to change structural racism in the food system, but also to decolonize our own way of speaking and relating to the earth and speaking of food and the earth. We had the chance to explore through a few questions this subject a little deeper. Obstacles to decolonization with the work in the food system. What are the opportunities we have to decolonize our work in the food system? And what are the points of advocacy of CPSA that need to be addressed in the coming years in Africa? The first key points focused on Our presenters were very generous and happy to discuss a subject that was so important. And so we said yes. They explained that the food system, involved all the activities in association with the activities, from production to the final stages. So the whole cycle of the agricultural cycle that includes agriculture, but also other things. In systems of environments that are wider. So they're not only autonomous systems but that make up part of an environment. So we think of in the food system that are taken up by a form of occupation of territory on food security for everyone, the way to not compromise economic bases that are required for food security of future generations. I'm going to take the time now to share a few slides that were shown to us because I think they're interesting. I'm going to share my screen. What was interesting for me, we see now that there are 2.37 billion people with food insecurity in 2020. And so they're going to go to bed without having eaten enough. So 80% of are involved in food secure agriculture. It shows us to the degree to which our system is failing, talking about food security and sovereignty. And as regarding the impacts of colonization on the food system, among others, all the people who are excluded from upgraded food chains by large agri-industries, or women, Indigenous people and young people who are often excluded from the dominant food systems in place, and how this system raises the risk of chronic illnesses and of forced settlement, because to maximize agricultural production, we want to displace people. So it can also cause a transition of the traditional the production and food systems that are traditional, that's focused more on rent being lucrative. And they're not necessarily recognized, but are still present. After that, we can see that decolonization is important because it allows us to eliminate barriers, structural barriers, with regarding power, and lead us to an environmental justice that is more inclusive and that will permit us to include groups who are actors ignored, that are a system that's more indigenous. How can we deliver a way of decolonizing the food system framework? The importance of dialogue that involve a multiplicity of actors. We reinforce over the long term the capacity of governance of actors within this food system. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you. Those were the points on which Mr. Corboui presented. So around the table, we were here for the discussion. Maria Theresa said that the first time to be in a civil society group to discuss about the decolonization. It was very important, but also very interesting as a discussion. She was reserved. One of the members more reserved, but she was also quite frank with the open dialogue. She mentioned the impact of colonization on nutrition and a lack of diversity in Bolivia for consumer products. It was a small range with production. For example, potatoes. In Bolivia, potatoes are essential, crucial to the local diet, now we're very limited as far as the diversity or of range available, because there's a large chain that will buy only one sort of potato so that they're uniform. Maria Theresa reminded us that science was important, but it was essential to listen to local knowledge and respect it. She reminded us how important it was for local communities to tell us what they thought about what we were asking on their way of doing things. And in Sangay, who repeated, Maria Theresa spoke about Bolivia, and the other person spoke about Senegal. He reiterated the points Maria Theresa had brought up, but also being able to support the initiatives financially. That is to say, develop financial tools that really allow the food system to the tangible food system and with a tangible decolonization. Because with the organization that's been in place for years, with a lack of financing, it is not likely to lead to changes in food security. We would need to direct these finances into sectors that are sustainable. For example, a system, not chains, not big supply chains, but local smaller chains that allow territorial development between small producers, eaters, and consumers, or Olivia used the expression eaters in Quebec. He asked an important question on financing and development that was based on colonization, but also local food security, but also the sustainability of the food system. He shared solutions in Africa that were in place for small producers, but that it also needed to be autonomy, sustainability, and a relationship with consumers. The fact of not depending or relying on one producer with millions of dollars only, it was important for people in Senegal, and the pandemic, the famous COVID-19, reinforced that narrative or that discussion in Senegal, at least, on the necessity of a national production that will give the country food autonomy. Following Sangay, the person finished the panel was Don Morrison. Don reminded us, he called us to engage in a process, a trip, a voyage to change our paradigms. Because while we're insisting about the food system, Don reminded us that nature should not be considered like a machine that supplies resources to be exploited, but more like a means of being in communication with the earth. Like earth is a way to enter into relation with the earth, but also with other human beings as well. His call was important because it was well received by the members of the group, and it's important to engage other conversations on which the other group, on how can we support this change, this paradigm shift with a food system to move towards a mode of exploitation or manufactured use relationship with the earth. That's the impact. Those are the main impact that from the elements of, the workshop that happened on January 18th, last January 18th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci, Geneviève.
Thank you, Geneviève.
I guess I do have maybe a follow-up question for you, or to ask maybe if this was spoken about in that session that you held. So you spoke about Bolivia and Senegal and other countries within Africa. And so you talked about how decolonizing, we need to consider kind of local food chains, the financing, the autonomy, the sustainability. And I also love the quote that you provided, that nature is not a machine to be exploited. So I'm wondering if those kind of principles that you spoke about, if you could maybe speak for a minute, I guess, about the connection to localization there. Maybe it's a little bit obvious, but also maybe within a Canadian context of the food system in Canada and taking these same principles and using them and applying them in this country.
Merci, mais là, je vais vraiment parler
Thank
à
you.
titre
So now it's personally, I'm just speaking now. I'm not speaking for the group. So indeed, that whole vision of viable food systems and localization of food systems, what it means is it changes the way that we're in relationship with the earth. What Don Morrison was sharing with us, and really touched upon a lot of what's happening in a lot of countries. We don't see the connection, the production with the earth. We don't see it. It's more a question of exploitation. It has to be a question of more how we nourish and feed the population, and how they become choices that belong to the population. What we produce, how do we produce, how do we process, and who do we sell these things to? So I think that for us, Tsuko, what it will change is how can we support in financial terms groups and peasant movements in their choices of the ways of producing, and how to create links not only with producers, with female producers as well, and peasants, and people who eat as well, the consumers and consumers. How can we create a connection to that, and how we can support the processes? I like what Theresa was saying as well. Support the processes that allow us to recreate links between peasants and those who eat on a local way. The role of the organization is to be a place of exchange, and not to do things instead of somebody, but really to provide spaces for dialogue, for discussion, to support in financial terms the decisions that are made by those people. However, our agricultural food policies that are international in nature, those international aid policies in Canada, are they in agreement with those principles? That remains to be seen. It's where groups of, sorry for the translators, it's the groups of the food security police group. That's why they're so important. They're lobbying groups and the defense and influential groups. So how we can orient our food policies in Canada so that it supports global processes, not to say, oh, you should produce cocoa in this way because we're going to sell it in the international market at such a price. So that makes for a price where you could live well. How can we come out of that vision in terms of value chain and the exploitation, monocultural, like agricultural exploitation, to support needs that are more based on the Western world, to come up with financial plans that are flexible to support local initiatives. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. That was comprehensive. And I think it highlighted the many actors needed for kind of sustainable change towards localizing of food systems, like you've described it. So I'd like now to bring Theresa into the conversation. And so, Theresa, I'd love for you to speak more about localization and the impacts and the influences in your work. And maybe if you've seen any, or if anything Geneviève said kind of resonates with you and what you've seen in your work throughout various parts of Africa as well. Over to you.
Sure. Yeah, so over the last 5 years, Foodgrains Bank coordinated a program with our partners in East Africa. It was funded by Global Affairs, and it really looked at food systems. It was to encourage smallholder farmers to practice conservation agricultures on their plot of land, and to scale that out into communities and into regions and so on. I think in the past we've done a lot of programming around conservation agriculture, but it had always been more plot by plot by plot, and wanting to focus this program on scale. And so because of that, we looked at what are some of the barriers in terms of food systems in these places, and realizing that farmers needed access to markets, realizing there needed to be a policy, an enabling policy environment. There needed to become communities of practice doing this and experimenting. And so that was the foundation of this program. And we rolled it out with 11 partners, and I think we had the mindset of localization, but it was sort of, because we were definitely working through those partners and being a facilitating thing. But I think as we started to go, our partners often were in more of the traditional way of working of tell us what to do and we'll do it. You're bringing the funding, tell us what to do. And it took quite a while in really getting this off the ground in some ways, because the point was not to tell what to do, but to figure out ways of experimenting and figure out what is the local environment in each of these contexts that will really facilitate this change and help create that structure. What is the local food systems that we're working into? What is the government policies that are keeping this from spreading? And what is enabling it to spread? And so we found that this localization process was really interesting. I think we started it off a little bit on the wrong foot, coming in with a PMF, as most of you know, like the performance framework, management framework, and brought that in, and partners were like, yeah, okay, this really isn't reflecting us. This is something that you and the donor helped decide. We want, we're interested in some pieces. We're not really interested in marketing. They were saying, we're not really interested in policy. We think those are good, but that's not our wheelhouse. We're good with local farmers, and we know them, and we'll work with them. And so we did a baseline. We did some of the standard things, and we realized in the baseline process that we probably weren't creating a good localized environment well enough. It was a bit more of a top-down baseline process, and we ended up with literally hundreds of pounds of paper and not really a lot of good data that was really useful. But then as we learned, and I learned more about how our partners were thinking and acting, and they were very excited to be involved in every step of the process. So I think by the time we got to our midterm evaluation, it had become a much more participatory process. It took us forever to do our midterm evaluation because the process of designing all the questions was a team effort. We had partners cross-learning with each other, and people were in this program. We also had like annual gatherings so our partners could share together, because I realized that the knowledge was coming from sharing of experiences, and I didn't have the experiences to share, they did. And they were so excited to hear how others were doing it in other places, and creating their own communities between each other. And so through our midterm process, we had partners go from each other's organizations and like learn from each other and interview each other. So instead of bringing in external experts and evaluators in this process, they evaluated themselves and each other. And that learning and team building through all of that, it really strengthened the program for the second half. And it created a real ownership of what had happened. It created an ownership of even basics like reporting and data collection that had been done for the donor in the past. And now they were like, no, actually, we need this. We need this information because we want to go to our government and tell them about this program. We want to tell them about the changes we're seeing in the communities. And in the second half of the program, things that partners at the start of the program were feeling were not for us. Like our partners said, we understand that marketing is important, but our farmers are so small. They have such tiny land holdings that marketing really isn't for them. They're not going to create enough to sell. They're gonna want to stay localized and stuff. And through the process of this and encouraging farmers to experiment, change was happening at the farmer level, and people were getting excess commodities, and farmers were pushing the partners to get into marketing and to experiment. And so it was really it was just really interesting to see how the program changed and developed. And there was the original program design that was one way. And as the program kept evolving, and we had annual planning sessions with partners, and that would often change the design. And that's one of the things I think that connected with some of what Geneviève was saying is, when we provide really scripted types of programming, it is not localization. I think we can kind of work with a general map, but we really need to have flexibility to change and to adapt. And we were very fortunate that our funding source too was not as tied in to, say, line items on budgets, but we had the ability to say, actually, we don't want to contract out to a marketing organization that's just going to do that for us. We want to work with partners and develop, what are community-based initiatives? How can our farmers learn to have better waste scales and better, post-harvest management is what they're interested in. And it really came out, a lot of it just came organically. And to me, it was shocking to see where the program went at the end. We started out the program with a goal of having 50,000 farmers experimenting. And we knew that was a stretch for us, and it was kind of like a lofty aspiration. And we ended up with well over 60,000 farmers trained and over 50,000 continuing to practice. Ethiopia in particular, well, it was a very interesting experience because our partners there at first were a little reticent to this idea and of experimenting and so on. They're just like, just tell us what to do, Theresa. Come on, just tell us what to do and we will do it. But as we went through the process, they realized actually, no, you don't need to tell us. And in fact, as the program went along, I suddenly was hearing stories from partners that wasn't included in reporting because it wasn't part of the design. And one of the most encouraging ones was they were suddenly talking about pigeon peas, which was one of the, this was basically a non-input program, but we did some new seeds were encouraged and so on to help with crop covers and soil fertility. And pigeon peas were one of those that were introduced to some of the areas in Ethiopia we were working, but they didn't have a market in Ethiopia. And so farmers were growing them because they were really good for the soil, and then they were eating them, but they were having a lot of excess. And the engagement with government in Ethiopia was quite amazing. And our partners brought, well, there's no market, we can't sell them, but there's a good commodity. And they were hearing from our partners in Kenya that India, for example, really likes pigeon peas. And there's a big market for it, but it wasn't part of the Ethiopian culture. So they were able to contact their local government people and the national government and Ministry of Agriculture. And they brought in also ministries from key stakeholders from other divisions and explained to them and worked through with local researchers about how pigeon peas can be sold, where they can be marketed, this whole thing. And at the end of it, pigeon peas are now on the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange. I remember kind of going to the partners, really? Can we really attribute this to the program? Because this feels like a stretch to me. And they're like, and they walked me through the steps, and I'm not presenting it well enough for them. But it was really amazing to see what can happen when you kind of take away some of the, when you work more on principles and creativity versus like fixed activity plans and parameters and provide that. Also in Ethiopia, the government started to see the difference that conservation agriculture can make in the soil, and that we're seeing results from partnerships that we had with local universities of local research, and they became excited. And in fact, partway through this program, they adopted, they changed their curriculum and included conservation agriculture in their agricultural extension curriculum for across the country. So that was pretty amazing, because when this started, there was a lot of backlash against it because the farmers were tilling their fields many, many times. And this was People were, the smallholder farmers practicing this were kind of looked down on and said, why are you doing this? This is kind of crazy. To the end, to there being like an official national level announcement saying this actually needs to be part of our curriculum. And we need to come out with a strategy of how to expand this across the country. So it really amazed me where things went. And I think one of the things the other thing that Geneviève was really talking about was that it's a food system. And that's how what we found in programming is that we really had to take that systems perspective and having them be locally led. It takes longer. It took a lot longer kind of to get things really started in our first couple of years of this program. But then it took off when it started to be more internalized, and it was really exciting to see where it went. I could talk for a long time about this.
No, thank you for sharing. And I also really appreciate the honesty around the things that did not work and were not effective, and those types of lessons learned, which I'm sure all of us know are sometimes equally or maybe even more valuable as learning pieces. So I do have a question for you as well. I love what you said about principles and creativity, maybe instead of more rigid parameters and work plans. And you mentioned with this particular project, you kind of went in the parameter and work plan route, and through collaboration and through time, kind of landed a little more on the principles and creativity side. So one question I have for you is maybe reflecting back, or thinking forward to maybe a hypothetical, another project. How might one go about or addressing, like starting at that principle and creativity part? I think there's always going to be that co-creating of the project once you get into it, but how might you start kind of going to your partners with a plan, but still not that rigid of a plan? Like how might you navigate that?
I think one of the pieces that I've learned is the mindset that you come into it with, and that you approach partners and talk with them. And somebody explained it to me actually in a meeting earlier this morning about a group of people, that coming in with a mindset of humility and not the answers. You can have kind of a roadmap that you want, but you're open to design and creativity, and we're not all the experts. We all come in with our skills or our pieces of the puzzle, but we need all these various pieces to come together.
Totally. And I also, if I can comment on one other point that you made, and when you said it, it really resonated with me. Back in November, OCIC, we had an idea jam around this concept of localization. And some of the ideas we heard from that really were echoed in what you just said as well, around it's not localization or a good practice to kind of go to the partners and say, you're now in charge of absolutely everything, and we're just going to give you the money. That's not, it doesn't mean putting the onus on our partners to be 100% kind of in that leadership role and to absolve ourselves. So I just think that was a really holistic overview. Thank you for that. So I'd like now to call in Celeste to speak a bit more from her experiences coming from a more grassroots Indigenous perspective and the work that you've done in many different of your communities. So Celeste, over to you.
It was really great to hear everyone talk about their international work. That's fantastic. I guess I'm the grassroots person here that's working on the ground, and I'm not facilitating any programs for other people. I'm actually doing the program. And not only am I doing that, but I'm actually making it up as I go along, which I think is really what a lot of Indigenous people are doing in Canada. So my business is built on my personal experience, which is what informs all of my work and which informs really a lot of people's work in this area. If we're working on the ground in Indigenous communities and in urban centers, as Indigenous people, we are experiencing the dismantling, obviously, of our food system. And so in trying to empower ourselves and empower our own people, we need to then figure out how to put it back together. So that's quite a big task for us to do, really. And so part of what I do through my personal experience, through my story, is that my great aunt was a seed keeper, and I was working in academia. I'm a recovering academic, and I really was working on international levels and that sort of thing. And what I started to realize was that as we lose our elders and as we start to lose the people that are in these positions to teach us, there is no other place we can learn these things as Indigenous people. So even though I was in university and I got accepted to Columbia to do some great work through policy and possibly work for the United Nations, my great aunt passed away. Now, she was one of the best agriculturalists, modern agriculturalists on Six Nations, and her loss was very significant. And the amount of knowledge that went with her was profound. I felt it right down to my bones that either I continue on to law school and you go kind of that way and work on international levels to save something that will probably not be here in 25 years. Or I could go back to my roots and follow those roots down and actually get the knowledge that I should have been getting earlier instead of going to university. I should have been at her side. I should have been learning those techniques. I should have been learning and had the seeds in my hand from the time I was young. Now, obviously, colonization, didn't allow me to do that because my grandmother went to residential school, and this is how knowledge systems are stopped, right? So, but my personal experience with the loss of her knowledge and the loss of her guidance really impacted me to make a huge change in my life. And so now I actually have around here somewhere, I've got a jar of her seeds, and that's what we started with. I started with a jar of her, actually right back here. You'll mind me just grabbing them here. This is what I started with. Here. I'm sorry, tech is they're gonna hate this, me moving around like this, but you know what? It is what it is. I'm an organic speaker. It comes from the heart, so sorry, guys. So I started with this. This is what changed my whole life, is getting some of the seeds that she saved. This is a blue corn. And it's, I even have the amount that I started with, which is this. You can see in the background here a little bit how there's more there. And so I've been growing that for years now to save the seed and to keep it. And now we're building up a network where we can now have farmers growing that seed and growing it out. And this is my family's legacy. This is my family's thing that needs to remain in the world. And I hope by doing what I've done, I can also bring other parts of my family. There's a lot of trauma in my family, as there is in a lot of Indigenous people's families. So I'm hoping that by my example, I can bring more of my family in to then do this seed saving, this important work. And it all honestly begins with seeds, because through this work, through the seed saving now, I realized that other Indigenous women, because you must realize that there is a value systems difference and a difference in the way Indigenous people farm, the way we look at traditional ecological knowledge, traditional knowledge. The women were the seed keepers and are the seed keepers, and we're the farmers. And if you look at the percentages of women farmers across the world and in Canada, we're, less than, a few percentages. It's all men that are farming. So when looking around, so I got the seeds in my hand, that's great, but now what do I do with these seeds? Another epiphany I had was when I grew this amazing ghost squash, Lakota ghost squash. And I had this, and I was so proud of this beautiful gray blue squash. And I handed it to an elder mentor of mine, and she took one look at it and she handed it back to me. And she said, I don't know what to do with this. What do you want me to do with it? I'm not going to cook it. And I thought, oh no, right? Like, we've lost our system so thoroughly that now we need to not just grow the seeds, but we also need to have the technique now to go back and do that. So that's what spurred on. So we started with cultural seeds, where I sell seeds and donate them as well, and make sure percentages go back to Indigenous communities, but also that started the lodge. So the lodge is We Will Plant Lodge, or Ga Gitigamik, and it means We Will Plant Lodge. And so what we're trying to do is and this is all on a grassroots level. This is just me, and I'm building a team around me that believe in the value of this. This isn't government driven. This is coming up straight from the ground, right? So we've been recognized by a couple of funders, and that's one of the things that Indigenous people need, is to be funded from funders that believe in our visions and don't take that top-down approach. It's really, really important. So one of the funders that are looking at us are Grand Challenges Canada, and they recognize that Indigenous innovation comes from Indigenous people ourselves, and that's where it needs to come from. So we are a social innovation project. I had to learn to become an entrepreneur and to find money to build this, and because this unfortunately, even though Indigenous people don't look at food as a commodity, we need to then fit into this colonial model where we need to say, okay, we're going to train women, right? Or retrain. It's always retrain. It's not train, because we have these systems. We just need to pull them up, and we need to just empower our women to take them back. And having like food insecurity and food justice is empowering the people. That's really where it starts, and where it begins, or where it ends. It's in the people themselves. So, and we have the strength to do it. So I think I'm just about at time. I can't see the clock though. So Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you, Celeste. And thank you for the vulnerability, really, in telling your story and what motivated you and continue to motivate you to really emphasize the importance, not just the importance, but the necessity of traditional knowledge, and specifically women engaging in this traditional knowledge. So I see there's a question in the chat or in the Q&A box that you may be positioned to address. The question reads, how is the localization agenda implemented and advocated on behalf of Indigenous communities in Canada, and specifically in Northern Canada? So, and I think your presentation spoke a little bit to that, but I would just provide you the space maybe to speak a little bit more broadly about localization. And yeah.
Yeah, I did look at the question, and my first thought, and I'm going to be frank, is, well, how would I know? I'm not the government who's implementing this. I'm just on the ground. But then I thought more deeply about it, and I thought, well, you know what? Indigenous people themselves are actually, and you might not know this because you're not in the circles that I'm in, but we're actually building an Indigenous circular economy. This is happening. It's happening now. And settlers don't realize this because we don't talk about it very much, but I'm a part of that. So part of my commitment in my business is to, employ Indigenous people, Indigenous women, to only get, my manufacturers are all Indigenous. So we are Indigenous people tend to be self-starting and we just end up doing a lot of the things ourselves, because a lot of the funding goes through channels that just honestly doesn't get to the ground. It goes to bands, it goes to programming. There's a lot of programs out there, but what Indigenous people actually need is grassroots funding to do it ourselves, because as we say, nothing about us without us. That's a huge thing always, that you must rely on anything to do with Indigenous people. And I probably didn't answer the question, but I'm sorry, that's the best I can do. But yeah, go for that.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, for those reflections. Very important. And so finally, I'd like to invite Marisa into the conversation to speak about Banco de Alimentos and how localization is used in that work. And also maybe Marisa, if you connected with kind of any of the comments from Celeste or from another one of the, or any of the other panelists, if any of those themes resonated for you. I think we may have, I'm not sure if Marisa maybe dropped off there for just one moment. I think we'll just give her 1 second if her connection dropped, 1 minute for her to rejoin. So in the meantime, I think while we wait for Marisa to find her way back to us, hopefully, if it's okay, Celeste, I would like to just actually engage you in another kind of question or conversation. And I think that I had spoken to you briefly about this before, and I would also invite our other panelists, depending on if Marisa returns, or perhaps to type in the chat. Oh, I see she's back. Excellent. Celeste, I will save that question for you. And Marisa, we'd love to invite you to speak on your experiences in localization.
Pido disculpas, un problema con...
Apologies. I had an internet connection problem. That is usual. At least that happens quite often in Argentina. We have these kind of challenges all the time. I had to change channels and I apologize. I didn't know it was going to happen right when I had to do my intervention. If you agree, I can tell you a little bit about the work that we've been carrying out in the Buenos Aires Food Bank. First of all, I'd like to repeat that the food bank is designed to work with people. It becomes a bridge between those who have not enough resources to have access to food and people who are willing to help those others. And I'd like to say, and I believe it is appropriate to say this, that we work with all the food banks and we have an aim, or we work under the 3 of the OSDs, as the eradicating hunger, avoiding food waste, and working in alliances. In that sense, regarding alliance, I'd like to say the following. We're one of the 18 food banks that are working currently in Argentina. There are 18 food banks, and we are one of those. We are the oldest one. We started working first. We are also part of the Argentinian Food Bank network. It binds together all food banks. And we're also part of the global food bank network. There are food banks ranging from Canada to the south of the continent. There are also food banks in Europe, Asia, in Oceania. We are all linked together by this global food bank network. This is to give you more or less a framework of our work. Okay, now I'd like to make reference to a few things. We have some food insecurity indicators that we are seeing in Argentina. Geneviève already showed us what is happening around the world. And I would like to show you what is happening in Argentina. This has happened mainly after the pandemic. These data are gathered by the social debt meter of Argentina. We have practically a 9% of households in our influence area of our food bank who are suffering from severe food insecurity. Those are households that are really very poor, in extreme poverty. The situation of these households that face a moderate food insecurity is almost 28%. And what is more concerning for us, and the reason why we put so much effort, passion to this, is that the effects of food insecurity have greater incidence in those households where there are children. In this case, in those households in which there are children, these numbers double up. The program that our food bank is working on, mainly in the suburban area, the one that you can see here in the map, in that area, 64% of households with their children are suffering food insecurity, moderate insecurity. All this results in an everyday challenge for organizations like ours. And these challenges are more and more pressing. These numbers got worse after the pandemic. We had mentioned something about the pandemic before. Unfortunately, with the quarantine and the lockdowns, resulted in many families not being able to go to work. And unfortunately, in the suburban area, had a steep decrease in their income, and therefore they could not secure food. At the beginning, I mentioned that we are aligned with 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. We have aims, which are reducing hunger, improving nutrition, and avoiding food waste. We have spoken a lot about this in the different speakers, with the different speakers before. We spoke about climate change. And well, we have been seeing this very close, very firsthand. And therefore, we wanted to increase this food service, because somehow some of the food that we are providing and we are receiving come from areas that are affected. And being able to avoid waste would be crucial for us. And it is therefore one of our aims. Now, how do we work? I don't know how many people in the audience actually know what a food bank does, but let me explain briefly. Basically, our work is divided into 4 steps or 4 sections. We have a very important logistics challenge, because very significant challenge, because we do have to be able to get the food. We have to secure those aliments that are completely fit for consumption. Unfortunately, perhaps the market circuit or the market is not able to use them. So with the help of many volunteers, now during the pandemic, we had to reinvent ourselves. We had to provide for or make sure that our volunteers were safe. We had to establish processes by which we could verify the food that we got, and also be careful with take care of our volunteers. In non-pandemic times, we would have many volunteers who would be verifying and checking the food, but now it has changed slightly. Then there is a third section. There we have a crucial partner. Theresa spoke about partners. Well, for us, the main partners, the main allies are the grassroots organizations, those that work in the field. They have different objectives and they do a very important community work. And within their aims, they have the purpose of providing some food aid. Therefore, these community or grassroots organizations working in the area, which is our incidence area, they will allow us to really make this food, make it to the people. In many cases, food banks would just finish with the land. Our food would end up being in landfills. But what we do is make sure this food makes it to people who can really use it. And together with a great effort by these grassroots organizations, we are able to make this food reach people. They're made available for people to either cook them and provide a meal to someone through the organizations, or perhaps this food could be, these commodities could be provided to families so that they cook at home. And with all this pandemic, it was very important for helping families. Here we can see an image of our warehouse. We started in 2001. Throughout the years, we were able to distribute more than 70 million kilos of food. Our storage has an area of 2,577 square meters, and we have different food banks, 18 around Argentina. We work with anyone who is hungry. Now, where we get our food from? This is all very much related with what we heard in the previous presentations, because there are many partners who are helping us, food manufacturers, agricultural producers. I'd like to tell you about vegetables and fruits here, then markets, fruit and vegetable markets, supermarkets, and of course, there's the invaluable collaboration of logistics companies, because we wouldn't be able to do any of this without their support. I would also like to mention how we've been able to evolve. Our evolution throughout the years, the number of beneficiaries. But look at 2020. In the year 2018, we had 143,000, but in the year 2020, we reached 500,000 people. Here you can see the effects of the pandemic were ravishing. And here we can see what has been already told in this panel. All our work in terms of recovering fruits and vegetables. At the beginning, I mentioned that we take the food, and throughout this cared logistics and throughout this program by the food banks in Argentina, some of the most available food that really leave the market are fruits and vegetables. So practically any food, any fruit or vegetable that is outside the dimensions requested or required for the market, and it doesn't need to be an exports market, it may be just a fruit that will be put in a supermarket food chain, well, this food is wasted. Fruits and vegetables have a specific size and shape that they need to have to go to the supermarket. Therefore, we have found that there are many fruits and vegetables that, due to non-conformities in terms of size or shape, are not being able to be sold. We've spoken to many agricultural producers, and they've told us that they cannot sell those products. Therefore, we started working together with other food banks around the country. We are located close to the Buenos Aires suburban area. And so we don't have any big producers who are close by. What do? Well, we work together with other food banks that are close to agricultural producers. There, fruits and vegetables are collected, and through different connections with the logistics companies, we try to get transportation for this food. So we contact different logistics companies, and we try to see, well, perhaps some logistics transportation company has to do the exact opposite trip. So what we do is offer them to take this in the trip that they will be doing for nothing, and we add those fruits and vegetables to that trip. That way we can make the food be transported, have the food transported to where we need it, where we work. So there we are carrying out a very significant work. We, on the one hand, organize the access to food for all the people I just mentioned, people who unfortunately are very much affected by the situation and are facing challenges regarding food safety. Then we also have an environmental impact that is very significant, and then we also are able to leverage and reduce waste. I'm sorry if I'm over time. I got so excited about this and I didn't check the time. So I think it's very important to mention what we have been doing with fruits and vegetables. Last year, 23% of the food that we rescued was used. We call it rescuing food. And we call it like that because we rescued from ending up in a landfill, or maybe them ending up in the fields without being used. Last year, we could rescue at 23% of fruits and vegetables, and those are crucial for good nutrition. They're also important for guaranteeing food security. We also worked on educational programs. We were teaching people about good nutrition. These are some of the programs that we have been carrying out. And I wanted to tell you about this. I don't know if I have more time or I should summarize. I try to summarize briefly what a food bank does and how we work in Buenos Aires.
Yes, thank you so much, Marisa. We are very getting down to our last 10 minutes, so I would like to invite all the panelists for kind of a rapid fire final round of reflections and what's next. So Marisa, I'd like to invite you to begin with kind of what's next, or maybe a brief challenge that you face, just a 1 minute response quickly.
El challenge es, creo que tiene que ver con lo que dije en mi
A
última.
challenge would be something related to what I last said, leveraging these opportunities more and more, trying to find which are the most nourishing food, working together with the local organizations, working in the field, and also a growing emphasis on good nutrition. I think that has to result in better nourished children. That is what we're looking for. The end aim of a food bank is not needing to exist and having people be able to access good food and nutrition. And also being able to have these grassroots organizations and have them not need to dedicate themselves to providing food, but to other things, and making sure people have access to meals. That would be the challenge, of course. And this would be for the coming years.
Thank you so much for that reflection. Briefly, I'd like to go next to Geneviève for just, again, a 1 minute closing and summary and what's next.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais parler en français. Donc, j'ai quand même écrit dans le chat parce que je vais faire du pouce
I'm going to write in the chat as well. One of the questions that was asked was, what's fair to ask of local partners as far as localization goes? The question to ask is, as we can adapt ourselves as an organization to better accompany an appropriation of the local community. How can we adapt our production and our fashion of working to be better adapted to accompany our partners? In the case of FSGP, the focus group tried to work on this food system, how to be able to do with this sufficient amount of humanity to resolve the power differentials while resting still dependent on a model that's done with not only with there are sound problems. To accompany us in this process, we're going to work, we hope, with a group, Donna working group of Indigenous group sovereignty in the food transition from colonized system, and their way of accompanying organizations. How the focus group hopes really to go into the next steps. I'd like to highlight what Marisa said for Pam, the fact of working with local producers to distribute with food distribution. I find that pertinent and interesting, especially that gives hope on the capacity of local food systems to be able to feed a local population and to avoid food wastage as well. Thank you.
Merci. I'd like to ask now Theresa for your final thoughts and what's next comment as well. Again, just 1 minute briefly.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Elizabeth. We are really excited to have been able to secure some additional funding for our partners to continue to work with the local government, with the government of Ethiopia, to help with the rolling out of conservation agriculture in their agriculture curriculum. And recognizing, and the government recognized that experimentation and local practice is really a key principle in how this worked. And that's not straightforward to how to roll that out into an agricultural development system that has thousands of trainers across the country. And so we've received some funding to help do more trainer of trainers work and in focusing on experimentation and adult learning practices. And we also have received some more funding to go alongside of the government and continue to do programming that we've been doing with smallholder farmers and providing documentation to support the government's initiatives and research and continuing to build that evidence base with them. And I have to say, like the localization of this became so much clearer during COVID, where we're negotiating all of these things, but it's not about us, and it's about being there to support and facilitate it. And it is our local partners that are negotiating with the government, and we do the back stuff of helping with the facilitating of the donors and smoothing out some of those other processes for them.
Thank you very much for that. And Celeste, finally, I'll invite you for your brief closing remarks.
Yeah, go on. I think because localization is about shifting a power downwards, right, to grassroots. And I think that we need to always start there. I think there's things that we need and need to be said, and that's leadership roles. We need the leadership of these things in order to move forward, because we know the local systems obviously better than anyone, right? We also need to have respect for our different value systems, because that's where all of it lies, right? And we also need local knowledge to be prioritized. Bringing in knowledge from other systems, is not something that is usually looked at as a good thing. And also we need, and this is really basic, we need direct funding. People on the ground need direct funding, because as we always keep saying, there's lots and lots of programs out there, but then you get this situation, which I think Theresa gets into, which is, well, we don't really know what to do with this funding because we've never had the empowerment, right? We've never had that ability, right? And so, and which is amazing to me, going through this process, how much someone, basically handing me this amount of money saying, you have an awesome innovation, you're coming from the ground, you know how to solve these problems that your own community has. I'm going to trust you with this money, and you're going to do it. And that's what we need. So yeah, I'll go.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for participating today. In our last final minute, I would like to invite all the participants to please complete the short Zoom poll that should be launching now on your screen. If you require the poll in French or in Spanish, the link to that will be posted in the chat. While you complete the poll, I would like to draw your attention to the other events happening for the Global Citizens Forum tomorrow. The session details, in addition to all of the bios and headshots and all you could want on that front, is in our participant package available now on our website. Tomorrow morning, bright and early at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, we are hosting a yoga session. This session is inclusive to all abilities, and you can absolutely have your camera turned off. If this forum were in person, we would be doing some sort of social kind of activity. So this is our way to try and bring that to you within our programming. Also tomorrow, we have a session on feminist approaches to localization with Oxfam Canada, and additionally a session with the Primates World Relief and Development Fund, hosting a session with their partners. And finally, we're hosting a discussion in partnership with Ray John ShareCare on women's grassroots leadership in Haiti. Finally, I'd like to offer sincere thanks to Theresa, Celeste, Marisa, and Geneviève for sharing their wisdom and their insights, their experience, their recommendations with us on this panel. I'd also like to thank Rakaya, Marilyn, Lisa, Kim, and Eliana from the OCIC team, as well as our interpreters and our interpretation supports, Ruben, Andre, Enrica, Eugenia, Roni, all from MCIS Language Solutions. So with that, thank you again, everybody. Thank you for attending, and we hope to see you throughout the remainder of our programming tomorrow.